Welcome to another special episode of This Week in Habs Land. We are coming to you post-game after the Habs drop a, quite frankly, disappointing game, 5-2 to the Ottawa Senators on Friday night. Brian, I think the Canadiens were essentially outplayed the entire game. Poor start again to the first period, and just in case they thought you didn't get that through your head, they also had a poor start to the second period. We can talk about the power play. The penalty kill was probably the one thing where I'm like, okay, no notes. I thought Montembeault was pretty decent, all things considered. Where do you want to start with today? Like, maybe it's not as important to go kind of period to period like we did on Tuesday night after the win against Detroit. We should mention that, so this could have been a clinching night for the playoffs for the Canadiens. It's not.
Yeah.
They needed to win in regulation to do so. So that's still up in the air. Saturday, again, will be a chance to clinch, but where did you want to start, Brian? Like, what caught your eye the most? It could be positive, but I'm presuming there's going to be more worries or things you were concerned about. What was the thing? Like, where was the eye of? I was going to say the eye of Sauron, but that makes you literally evil. Where was the eye of Brian tonight?
Very much on the fact that you can't keep winning games trying to come back. It's just not a feasible formula. So to start games slow like this is never a recipe for success. And you were right to point out that it was not Monty's fault. You know, the 4 goals that were put in on him, the score in the end was 5-2. The 4 goals that were put in on Monty, I didn't think any of them were his fault. Maybe the rebound off his blocker, maybe he could have controlled that better. That's the one little thing you can nitpick. But the first goal, the Habs give up the slot, and that was in the first minute. So, like, they started completely soft. The Sens basically just watching the Philadelphia tape from a couple weeks back and saying, oh, we could just sneak into the slot against the Montreal Canadiens. Perfect. The second goal, Cousins buries a blockered rebound, that blocker that Monty pushed the puck, I guess, just a little bit too far. Still less than 5 minutes down. Now they're down 2. And anyone care to guess how'd they score their third goal, Jordan? The Ottawa Senators. If you guessed an Ottawa Senators standing in the slot, you'd be right, because that's exactly how the third one happened. Yeah. And then the fourth one is a point shot with not one bad bounce, 3 bad bounces. It deflected 3 times on the way to the net. So, like, to blame Monty in this, I think, would be a misstep. He faced 33 shots, did well on the ones that were savable.
What I thought was kind of interesting, I noticed off the bat, and I usually don't think this stuff matters, but I was starting to write notes at the very beginning of the game, first shift. Who did they start? They started the Suzuki line, which I have not kept track of this all season, but I feel like saying it's usually either the Evans line or the Dvorak line that starts the game. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then before I could even finish my notes, they concede, and it's 1-0. And I'm like, well, I don't want to look too far into this, but that was a bit of a microcosm of the game for the first line. I thought the bottom 6 had, certainly the third line, like, it was one of those games where it's like, it's going to have to be these guys again that provide the spark, and they eventually do when they open the scoring in the second period. But I thought that the Evans line was good. I thought Armia showed, like, maybe just a little bit more offensively than we've been seeing in the past, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And I've talked about, like, there's clearly a hand injury. I don't know if that's getting better. I don't know if this was just a good night for him. But the top 2 lines, in different bits and bobs, weren't great. I know the Suzuki line scored, and, like, each of them individually played a big role in that goal. But overall, I thought the energy was missing and the consistency was missing from the Canadiens, especially in that first period. Again, just going down, struggling on zone entries. And maybe that's a thing. Teams have clearly caught on now that the Canadiens are not ready when the games start, and you can take advantage of them. If you clog up the neutral zone, you don't let them come in with possession, come in with speed, and then they're not awake enough, I guess, to, like, dump and chase immediately unless it's that Dvorak line.
Yeah, that's right. The other lines are not activating in the same way as them. They're not as impactful physically either. Because, yes, that goal was huge from Christian Dvorak, the low glove shot. Hugely needed, like the most important goal in that match between the two of them, because that's all they scored. But more importantly than that, Gallagher and Anderson both being implicated physically. I loved Pizzetta's game. You were right to bring him up before too. And that really vicious tilt with Hodgson, just trying to inject some life still in the second period. Easily a dozen hits, like good punches landed between the two of them. And Hodgson started with the upper hand. Pizzetta finished the fight on top. So, like, the bottom 6, they were bringing the energy. They were trying to do anything they could to light that spark, but the skilled lines have to be bringing it as well. There was one really nice north-south attack in the third period from Newhook, and the pass goes down, And I was like, oh, sick. The second line's contributing. And it was David Savard in the slot.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, no, it wasn't. It was Savard pinching. And it almost worked. That was cool. And then the fourth line tried the same north-south. I think in the third, like they were trying stuff. Hudson at one point deked himself into a scoring position in the high slot. Ripped a shot, didn't work. Like it just seemed like it was much too little too late. They had a couple opportunities in the third. The second period was their best, and even then I think Ottawa, despite putting less shots on net, put more dangerous ones. And so there was just no getting back in this game. And this is a road game, Jordan, and we've seen this all year that in road games the Canadiens do not play the same way. They don't have the same spark. The lack of the fans, maybe that's what it is, but they have to figure it out, because in every single series they're going to be the road team. No matter who they play against, they're going to be the road team. So they're going to have to get used to that. This game also wasn't just clinching. It was an opportunity to get ahead of Ottawa.
Yeah.
Or possibly like give themselves a chance to get ahead of Ottawa.
Yeah, they would have been really within striking distance. That ship has sailed at this point. What I have found interesting over the last few games really is it's not only the slow starts, like they have it's not an on-off thing from a effort standpoint, although it might be, but it's almost from like a belief standpoint. Until they get that first goal, they're kind of wandering a little bit. The confidence is not totally there. And then they get their first goal of the game and it's like, okay, game on now. I just noticed that the last few games, and that's something to keep track of over the next three, is what do they do before they score that first goal, and why are they not as effective as they are once they get that first goal? It could speak to a confidence thing, or I don't know. Maybe they just need to get over these slow starts. Brian, I did want to get into the top two lines, specifically two wingers. I don't know if there was one you wanted to talk about more than the other between Patrick Laine and Juraj Slafkovsky. Have your pick. Who do you want to discuss first?
I mean, are we going to positive places, Jordan? Are we going to the gumdrop lane?
Not positive, but not like, we're not going to go scorched earth here. I think this is a nice little safe space for constructive criticism. And At the end of the day, these are still players we root for. We're never going to tear them down, I don't think.
Of course. No, okay. I'm good with that then. Let's do that. Then let's start with Slafkovsky. Let's get Slafkovsky.
Okay, so Slafkovsky's benched for a good chunk of the third period. And I wonder, like, do you wish you were seeing more out of Slafkovsky down the stretch here? These last, 5-6 games. Like, he'll pick up a point here and there, and he has a chance very legitimately now to eclipse his point total from last year, which for most of the season was out of reach. So you have to give him some credit on that. But, if we're just doing an exercise, Brian, of the best players on the team the last 20-plus games, Suzuki, Hudson, 1-2, we can have a whole fight about it. We probably will when the season ends. That's the top two. I think in the last 20 games, pretty clearly it's Montembeault probably 3, just a hair over Caulfield. That 1-2 is probably back and forth. Then, so we're 4 guys deep. Then I think it's the whole third line, more or less. Again, I'm talking these last 20 games, right? That is, right. It's Gallagher, it's Anderson, it's Dvorak. So now we're 7 guys deep, and I've still not gone to Slafkovsky, and I still have Caden Gooley and Jake Evans probably ahead of him. Is that fair to say that Slav is at most the 10th best player during this lead up to this postseason? It's not a run, but an attempt to make a playoff spot, that Slav has been no better than the 10th best guy on the team?
I don't know about that. I think his impact has been less than we've been hoping. But he's still in a good spot in terms of the points that he's produced. I think a lot of that was prior, though. The last 5 games definitely he's slowed down a little bit. But also, as I think about it, a lot of those points are probably secondary assists, if I had to remember them, to be honest with you. Nick Suzuki obviously leading the pack in terms of points and production, and so Slafkovsky, I think, benefited from that. I remember in the 12 games since the break, he had something like 11 points or something like that. He started on a tear and has just basically slowed down a little bit since then. I'm not worried at all about Juraj Slafkovsky at this point. I would like to see maybe a little bit more intensity to his game, maybe a little bit more, I guess, foresight. When he has the puck. He seems to be rushing some plays, which at times is great. On the pass he made to Suzuki tonight, if he didn't rush that, the puck wouldn't have gotten through, and it barely did. It got just tipped by the defender, just slowed down a little, and then Suzuki could put it in the net. So that's an example of a play that worked. But a lot of the time I do find he's rushing things in the offensive zone. So he, like a lot of Montreal Canadiens, I think just has to slow down a little bit. I don't want to get too down on a guy who has 16 points in the last 20 games.
Right.
But I do understand that you're saying that like they weren't all 100% deserved. Maybe?
Yeah. So for the season, just so we're tracking it, at 5-on-5, Juraj Slafkovsky coming into today's game, 11 primary assists, 13 secondary assists. Not too dissimilar. Hudson's 11 and 16, Suzuki's 16 and 13. So it's, basically all the same in terms of the division. I remember last year he actually had a pretty high number of primary assists. I know he was the guy that tended to feed Suzuki on the power play a lot more last year, and look how much has changed that. I still think the power play is a bit of a disaster. We'll get to that when we get to Patrik Laine. When I say like, do I wish I was seeing more out of Slafkovsky again? It has nothing to do with like the long-term projection of who I think this guy will be, which I still think is like a 60 to 70 point power forward who's kind of sneaky when it comes to playmaking. It's more towards like, this is the first big moment for him, for a lot of them, as Montreal Canadiens. I just wish there was a bit more. The consistency has just not been there as much this season as it was last year, I find. That much has stayed true. But yeah, and clearly St. Louis is seeing that too. Because he'll kind of, knock him off the first line, bench him for, I think he had 2 shifts in the first 12 or 13 minutes of the third period. It was pretty sparse. And then he started getting some playing time towards the end of the game as they were trying to push for it. I don't know. It's not a referendum on Slav. I'm just saying,
yeah, of course.
Let's see a bit more. This is the moment. We're seeing 2 guys specifically, and I'll include Caulfield in here. I know I feel like I've separated Caulfield. I've almost demoted him down a tier, but Hudson, Suzuki, Caulfield are all meeting the moment. For the most part, they are here. Same goes for Samuel Montembeault. Like, they are at the forefront. They are the vanguard of this team making their playoff push. Slav has not been there. Slav, of course, it's not much younger. He's the same draft class as Lane Hudson. But Hudson, I think we just have compartmentalized as like a potential likely superstar. Whereas Slav, we're not at that, and that's fine. I just wish I was seeing a bit more.
Yeah, last season around this time, we were watching him take over games. But the sad part about that was they were games that didn't matter. We were already out of a playoff possibility. And now the games matter. And so you want to be seeing Juraj Slafkovsky taking over games physically, which I think he's done quite a few times this season. So it's not like we haven't seen it at all. We're seeing glimpses of it. But you're right, it has to be much more consistent. Same with the offensive production. Same with the playmaking, which you mentioned as well, it's such a key part of his game. And that's why I think you just got to slow the game down. Everybody's got to just take a breath at this point. They likely still have an incredible opportunity here to make the playoffs. They literally just need 2 points. So I think it extends to a lot of guys on the team right now that there's this, anxiety, this nervousness of like, wow, we're in somewhere that we want to be. And as human beings, just naturally, sometimes when we get to where we want to be, we're not entirely comfortable there.
Yeah. And look, I'm saying all this, and he had a pretty big role in one of the goals tonight. Like, maybe that's part of the frustration, is that there's clearly so much talent there and ability to make special plays. And I'm not seeing the consistency, and I think clearly the coach isn't either. Let's go to the other guy. Patrik Laine. Bad penalty to start the third period.
Yes.
But to me, there was a power play, one of the power plays in the second period, where like, I don't know, they have kind of smoke and mirrored the power play this year behind Laine's shot. But there was one of the power plays where I feel like the puck was on the stick for like 20 seconds. And for some reason, he was the one almost operating the power play, not Hudson, not Suzuki. And I think clearly this one too, like Laine was kind of getting moved around in the third period as well. Not quite benched the way that Juraj Slafkovsky was, but there were some shifts with Laine on the fourth line. And I recognize some of those is just stepping in for Pezzetta when, Pezzetta's obviously not going to get more than 7 or 8 minutes in most of these games. But that one too, like, the eye test was telling me Patrik Laine did not have a good game. You and I were just looking at the hockey stat card right before we started, and he's kind of middle of the pack among Habs players. But when you look at ice time, it's like 13 minutes. Like, I don't know. This one too, like, and this is no surprise for who Patrik Laine is, right? If he's not in his office on the power play, it's very hit or miss with him. And I just thought he had a pretty rough game.
Yeah, I did too. You didn't see what you wanted to see from Patrik Laine tonight. Though, like, I'll put it to you this way: had the power play connected and he scored a goal on it, does that change things? I just get the sense right now that we're looking at Patrik Laine a lot of the times, you and I, but also the Habs community in general, is if we're getting the results on the power play, everybody's happy. But everybody seems to be ignoring his 5-on-5 play. And maybe that's not fair. I think a lot of people have pointed it out. But it seems as though everybody's kind of okay to not look at it when he's scoring 1 or 2 goals on the power play a night, which hasn't been the case lately. And they had been winning games despite that, which has been fantastic. But that's part of the identity of the Montreal Canadiens. That's part of the reason that the Habs have more points than all the teams that are chasing them right now. Like, we wouldn't be at 87 points without Patrick Laine's shot on the power play since the 20-ish game mark when he came in at the beginning of the season. So he's a big part of this team, and the success that they hopefully will have in the playoffs will be contingent on him figuring this out, because that's one way they're going to have to score goals.
We're not going to talk about it now, but I think his contract extension discussion in the offseason is going to be one of the more fascinating debates among Canadian fans, because it's going to be interesting. One last thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap. We don't have to go as long as last episode because we're less happy. Arber Xhekaj,
yes,
has become the odd man out. David Savard is drawn in. I thought Alex Harris had a couple rough games recently. Tonight against the Senators, there's no exception to that. I thought he was quite poor. The other part of it too with Xhekaj is this is eye test, right? Like, I don't know how we quantify this. It seems like teams feel freer to take more liberties with certain Montreal Canadiens players. There's one moment with Lane Hudson in the third period, I think, ticked off quite a few players where he took a check to the head. That wouldn't happen, we think,
right,
if Arber Xhekaj was in there. It's Schrodinger's Xhekaj or whatever. Like, we don't know what would actually happen, but there's an argument to be made there. What should St. Louis do here? Because we've talked about scratching Savard. Tough choice. Strubal's been decent. Strubal's been definitely not the fifth. Well, sorry, I should say Strubal's definitely not been the sixth best defenseman. He's been better than Savard, but Savard has the seniority. What do you do? Do you think about bringing Xhekaj back into the lineup for some of these last few games?
I would definitely consider it if you fear that. I mean, tonight would have been the night. Should have been the night, I think. Just on the road against a rival who historically has pushed you around a little bit, especially in preseason. And Xhekaj always kind of quells that. Not disparaging Pizzetta, who we talked about his fight earlier. Not disparaging Josh Anderson, who I think is another tough customer on the Canadiens, who will go and is willing to stand up for his teammates, but certainly not in the class of Xhekaj. They're not a deterrent the way that he is. He's just such a good deterrent for violence, for messing with your goaltender, for hitting the little guys, which, as you said, that headshot, I didn't like it either. He definitely would be a deterrent. Now, you can't sacrifice your defense for that, though. I think removing Savard, I don't know that it sacrifices your defense all that much. He did have a really important block. Yes. I say important. We lost anyway, but it was a crucial block when that delayed penalty was happening. We were talking about the Laine penalty before. Delayed penalty. Monty's way out of his net on the other side. He had just made another save. And so Savard comes in and blocks the shot. Huge. So it kind of sucks throwing him under the bus at this point, but I just think Xhekaj would bring a little bit more speed, more intensity, and he would kind of force people away from the front of the net, which is always nice.
It's just an idea, right? Like, what is the effect of having Xhekaj in the game? What does it do for the room if you have Savard as one of your scratchers? It's a complicated thing that we've talked about that I don't know if maybe push comes to shove, even in the postseason, if the Canadiens make it there. We'll see what happens. Listen, 3 games left. The Canadiens are still in a great position to be able to make the postseason. The understanding on the Ivan Demidov watch is that the debut will be Monday against the Chicago Blackhawks at home, which at this point is kind of the worst case scenario. This is the game they have to win to qualify. They have a back-to-back now with in Toronto against the Leafs, so we'll see what happens. I'm sure I think he's still in Toronto. He'll meet the team there, so we'll see what happens. Brian, any parting words before we wrap?
I don't think so, but I like thinking that the game in Toronto might be the clinching game. I know it's easier to think that the one at home versus Chicago will be, but it would be pretty sweet to beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in order to clinch. Would have been sweet to beat the Sens too, but let's do it against the Leafs. And I actually don't mind that the Sens will be playing them. Yeah. I'm kind of excited to go through the front door against the Washington Capitals if we get there.
We'll see. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Again, unfortunately, Habs drop the Friday night game to the Ottawa Senators, but still in great shape for the postseason. You can follow us on social media at HabsLandPod on Blue Sky and TikTok. If you like what you hear, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Until the post-game episode against the Leafs, which we'll be dropping that one a little bit later, probably closer to noon on Sunday, rather than immediately after the game on Saturday night. Until then, go Habs.